This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everybody, and season's greetings. This is our final board meeting of the year, and we're going to talk about a bit about where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And so I want to call this meeting to order on the 17th day of December, 2021 at 9:03 a.m. Do we have any public comments? Hearing none. Let's move right on to the consent agenda. And I think there are 4 items on this agenda, beginning with the minutes. Does anybody have any questions, concerns about the minutes? So number 2 item, we're going to talk about operating procedures. We've approved new procedures based on new new responsibilities. And who's going to talk about that? Brian, is that you?
Yeah, why don't I just briefly cover these items here on consent. In general, on the consent agenda, we'll typically seek a motion for folks to approve the consent agenda, but we have a number of new board members, so we'll probably for the next couple meetings just go through it just so folks know what these things are. So on the operating procedures, you might recall back in October, to ensure that all of our governance documents are aligned with the new statutory requirements underneath Public Act 21-115, an act concerning climate adaptation, which expands the scope of the Green Bank. We modified a number of things working through the Audit, Compliance, and Governance Committee, and then recommendations to the board, one of them being the operating procedures of the organization. So following that October meeting, we sent to public comment through the Connecticut Law Journal, I believe is how we distribute it. We didn't receive any public comments, so what you see in your consent agenda is the red line edits that you saw back in October. Number 3, position description. So for any director level and above position, the board approves of those position descriptions. In this case, I'm promoting Eric Schrago, who is the Managing Director of Operations, to Vice President of Operations. So it's past process to run those position descriptions through the board, and we've done it through consent. And then number 4 is the fuel cell energy project. I believe we discussed it last time in October. We just need another month to get to the closing, so we're extending that request for an additional month. So these are items that Lonnie and I talk about before the board meetings, just to ensure that we feel comfortable that these are pretty straightforward stuff, so we put them on the consent agenda. So that's just to give you all some background on that. And then sometimes under consent, we'll provide report outs. In this case, we provided a memo to the board that provides an update on Inclusive Prosperity Capital's tax equity raise, and some slight modifications to some of the existing contracts that are immaterial. So it's just a report out. What we're seeking is a motion to approve the consent agenda, which includes resolutions 1 through 4.
This is John Harity. I'd move to approve the consent agenda.
Do I hear a second?
I second. This is Brenda Watson.
Thank you, Brenda. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Any abstentions? Excellent. Okay, moving on. Let's see, our next items are incentive programs. As we know, we're saying goodbye to RSIP. And who's going to talk about this?
Going to be me, along with Sergio.
Oh, great, Sergio. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, and good morning, everyone. So I wanted to provide a few updates about RCIP and RCP as we get to the final 2 weeks of the program. The chart on the left, the mostly green bar, represents RCIP. It has a capacity statutory target of 350 megawatts of deployed capacity. We have built 347.8 megawatts, which represents 99.4% of the program capacity. There is 2.1 megawatts of approved projects that need to be completed. And we anticipate that by the end of January, this will be achieved. On the right, we have the 2 steps that make up RCP. As you might recall, RCP was a 32 megawatt extension above and beyond the 350 megawatts of RCIP that was approved by the board. And it was aimed at supporting the local solar industry go through COVID. Step 16 has 10 megawatts of capacity. Step 17 has 22 megawatts of capacity. That's a 32. Between the 2 steps, we have completed 14.2 megawatts of projects, representing 44% of the total capacity allocated to RCP. And we have approved everything but 1 megawatt, which is what we're trying to do over the next couple of weeks, so that by December 31, all RCP is approved, and then we will focus our efforts in getting all those projects completed, meaning the oranges and the gray, to turn those into green at some point in 2022. Yesterday, in our monthly staff meeting, I was explaining that there are 2 key dates coming up that relate to RCIP. One is December 31. Obviously, it's the end of the program. And after December 31, all the projects, all the solar PV projects, will have to go directly to the utilities and choose one of the 2 tariffs that will be available. It will be the official start of the Residential Renewable Energy Solutions Program. I think that's the name, Residential Renewable Energy Solutions, for which the utilities will be responsible. So at that point, all solar projects that have a reservation of funds letter from RCIP, meaning they were approved at some point during RCIP or RCP, and that filed a completed application, a completed interconnection application with the utilities, will be grandfathered under net metering, right? And these projects will continue to be part of RCIP, but we will continue to work with contractors to complete those projects. But if the projects fail to submit the complete interconnection application with the utilities by that date, then those projects will be dropped from RCIP, and they will lose their access to net metering. So it's a very, very important date for us. And the second important date will be January 31 of 2022, which is the cutoff for us to identify what projects can be SREC'd in both RCIP and RCP. It will be our last SREC batch. I think we have 4.5 megawatts still available that we can SREC. And in early to mid-February, we're going to prepare all the documentation that needs to be submitted to PURA for the REG Class 1 certification for 2021 vintage SRECs. All the remaining projects that cannot be SREC'd, then they will be used to create regular REGs and we're gonna use those recs to meet our obligation with Exelon. If you remember the load serving entity that we sold recs to about a year ago. So for 10 years, right, we've played kind of a business development role in RCIP, providing incentives to help deploy residential solar PV in the state. And now we're transitioning to more of an asset management role where we're going to have to monitor the performance of these 350 megawatts of assets that we help deploy. There's roughly 47,000 systems in the state. We're going to have to assist in the maintenance of those assets to ensure that they keep generating energy for many, many more years. And we're going to support the monetization of these assets via SRECs. So it's a big change for us. We're in transitioning mode right now. Is there any questions related to RCIP and RCP?
Yes, this is John Harity. I was wondering what the solar installers have to say about this. Are they comfortable with it? Are they saying, we need to have the continued incentives? What's their reaction?
Yeah, that's a great question. What we've heard is that, they're discouraged by the fact that the upfront incentive is going away. Even though, right, the tariff, we help the EDCs design tariffs that will provide the same or the equivalent compensation of RCIP over 20 years. It's not going to be in the form of an upfront incentive, and that is discouraging to all contractors. So they are, I mean, that's the primary argument we're hearing from them these days. It's probably gonna be a tougher sell for them when customers don't see the upfront incentive. John, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess in the long run, it sort of leads to the question of whether it ends up being the right thing to do, I guess.
Yes. Only time will tell.
But thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So next slide, please. All right, so let's talk about revenue grade meter replacement that I've been reporting on for a few months now. So as you might recall, we identified around 5,000 homeowner-owned meters that are operating on 3G cellular networks, and will have to be replaced with 4G compatible meters due to the sunset of the 3G cellular networks across the country. And why is this important? Because we need meters communicating production data to our monitoring platform in order for us to aggregate this data, go to PURA to request REG Class 1 certification, and then go to the NEPL GIS to register those REGs and monetize them. So of the roughly 5,000 meters that need to be replaced, we have completed 639 replacements. It's only 13% of the targeted meters. The anticipated shutdown of the AT&T 3G network is March 1st, 2022. 99% of our meters operate on AT&T. And unless AT&T decides to once again postpone the sunset because they've postponed it multiple times, we could start seeing solar PV systems dropping from our monitoring platform. And dropping meaning this is going to stop reporting. They will continue. The PV systems will continue to operate, will continue to power the homes. It's just a matter that we're not going to be able to see that production, to register that production. So when we learned about the shutdown, and the time it was going to take us to replace all these, these many meters, we reached out to Professor Ken Gillingham in Yale, who developed an algorithm to estimate the energy production of residential solar PV systems that were going to be impacted by the 3G issue. Professor Gillingham developed an algorithm that is like 99.9% accurate in estimating solar PV production. And for the past few months, we've been working with the markets committee of NEPL GIS to get approval to use this methodology developed by Professor Gillingham to create FREX. Basically using estimated data in lieu of having 4G meters communicating actual data to our monitoring platform. We were expecting a decision last week, but for some technical issues, internal issues to the NEPL GIS, the discussion was taken off the agenda, and it's gonna now to be part of the January 11 and 12 agenda. So we're very optimistic that our methodology will be approved, and if that happens, we will continue to create and monetize RECs and SRECs as if nothing ever happened. Is there any question?
Sergio, this is Matt. Just a question, and my memory is a little vague on this, but don't we have some financial agreements with third parties to whom we securitized some of the revenue? And if so, is someone going to go back and look just to make sure that those agreements sort of are okay with as long as the methodology is approved by NEPL GIS?
Yeah, Matt, we did that review because that was probably my biggest concern, was screwing up with the securitization. So, I mean, as long as these RECs are approved through NEPL, the securitization or any of those documents didn't really get that much into the weeds.
Great. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And next slide, please. All right, so now we're going to talk about energy storage solutions, and what you're going to see is the culmination of 2+ years of work. And I can tell you, I started with the bank probably 18 months ago, and I've been working on battery storage for 18 months. I believe even my interview was about battery storage. So I cannot be more excited to be where we are. We are about to launch this program, and it's very exciting times for us. So joining me today are Sarah Harari. She is Associate Director of Innovation and Senior Advisor to the CEO, and also Ed Kranich, and Ed is Senior Manager of Battery Storage. They're going to describe the battery storage program that, as I said, is expected to launch January 1st. So I believe Brian is going to go over the very first slide that explains the timeline of everything that has happened over the past few years.
Great. Thank you, Sergio.
Brian.
Yes, and you indeed, your final interview was a scenario around the battery storage program. And you did a great job on it, which is evident in why we're here today. But just some timeline, just in terms of what got us here. Chair Reed will know in her former co-chair position of the E&T committee that back in the summer of 2015, a special session bill passed, and included in that budget resolution were sections 103 and 104, which were effectively the grid modernization bill. So lots of activity, I remember, during that legislative session. It passed during the summer. And then actually what we're missing here is in, I should have included this, in 2017, then Chair Dykes of the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority initiated docket number 171203, which was to begin the grid modernization proceedings. In March of 2019, the Green Bank filed an application with PURA for the Electric Efficiency Partners Program. Some of you policy wonks out there might recall that old Public Act 07242. I think it was called an Act Concerning Electricity and Energy Efficiency, something like that. Well, we filed into PURA the ability for the Green Bank to be an efficiency partner. And in that docket there, PURA approved of the Green Bank demonstrating managerial, financial, and technical capability to be a partner. So we were on the pathway to connecting solar PV and battery storage through a benefit cost analysis like approach, and Sarah's going to talk about that in a second. Then in October of 2019, Chair Gillette issued the Equitable Modern Grid Initiative. Several of our board members attended the joint committee meeting earlier this week where Director Josh Ryer talked about that framework. I'll send out a link to folks. It was a great presentation on the foundation of that docket, which included reopener number 3, which involved battery storage. Last summer, July 31st, the Green Bank filed a solarized storage proposal, taking our history of understanding the residential solar market, as Sergio just laid out, and our understanding for where battery storage was going to go, given our involvement in the EAP docket. This was probably one of the best, most comprehensive proposals I've ever been involved in. I think PURA really recognized that, and in January issued a straw proposal based on the solarized storage proposal. So really exciting things happened. Then in July, PURA issued a decision essentially saying that the Green Bank and the electric distribution companies, both UI and Eversource, would be co-administrators of the battery storage program. We had some fine tuning to do on the incentive structure in order to achieve the policy targets that PURA was after, and all of that just recently completed in December with the final decision on the incentive structure that Sarah is going to talk about. So lots of cool stuff, lots of really passionate stakeholders in the process, great feedback, great analytics, looking at other states, digging into the numbers. And what you're going to see here is really the results, as Sergio indicated, of 2 years of hard work. And let me turn it over to Sarah Harari.
Thanks, Brian. So we're on slide 12 now for those of you following at home. So as Brian showed on the previous slide, under Public Act 2153, there's a statewide goal to have 1,000 megawatts of storage deployed in Connecticut by the end of the decade. And as part of that, there's a 580 megawatt chunk of that that's going to be deployed behind the meter in residential, commercial, industrial customers. And that goal is evenly split between residential and C&I customer classes. And what we're focused on now is the first 3-year chunk. So deploying 100 megawatts by the end of 2024. If you could go to the next slide, please. So this program was set up with 4 key policy objectives that were mandated by PURA, but that Green Bank holds close to our heart. So the first one is around cost effectiveness. In establishing this program, PURA wanted to ensure that the benefits to electric ratepayers from peak load reduction from dispatching these batteries exceeded the cost of the program. So what that means is really that there's no cost shift in deploying that 580 megawatts of storage from participants to ratepayers, and that ratepayers will actually benefit from this program being in place. It's a core tenet of the program. I'm going to spend some time digging into how we established that this would be a cost-effective program in the next few slides. The second core tenet is resilience. Climate change is already having an impact on Connecticut, and following Hurricane Isaias, PURA really increased its focus on distributed resilience. And so that's not just making sure that the grid stays up and is hardened to the impacts of storms, but also that individual customers have access to resiliency assets. And will have power in the event of an outage. And so in this program, we want to ensure that those customers will have access to power from their systems in the event of a grid outage. That's not necessarily true for other clean energy assets that are out there in the field. Depending on how you installed your solar, you might not have access to it during an outage. In this program, that was really a core focus and part of the design of it. And PURA added additional value streams as an incentive to draw in certain customer classes that are under the greatest threat from outages, including critical facilities and grid edge customers. PURA defines grid edge customers as the top 10 locations with the most frequent and longest duration outages. It also provides those additional value streams to customers who are replacing diesel generators and small business customers. Under vulnerable communities, PURA really shares the Green Bank focus on making sure that everybody benefits from these programs, and from the outset of the Equitable Modern Grid framework that Director Ryer went over in the meeting earlier this week that Brian alluded to, PURA has really been adamant about ensuring that our most vulnerable communities are engaged and able to benefit from the various programs that are coming out of this docket. As Ed will dive into later, this program provides higher upfront incentives to participants from vulnerable communities, including low-income households, underserved communities, and those living in affordable multifamily housing, which is a real win for our team. The Green Bank has been directed to focus on ensuring that no less than 40% of storage systems deployed through this program are installed in vulnerable communities. So this is taking Connecticut from a solar with justice state as a result of RCIP and building on that to create a storage with justice state. I'm still working on making sure that that rolls off the tongue. A storage with justice state as a result of energy storage solutions. And finally, similar to the solar program, Green Bank has been directed to administer the program that fosters the sustained orderly development of the local battery storage industry. If you could move to the next slide, which is slide 14. So as I hinted at above, this is the benefit cost analysis and the cost effectiveness testing was a core element of the program design that we went through over that 2-year period. A lot of Connecticut energy program design happens in the nitty-gritty world of the benefit cost analysis, and there are several different kinds of cost tests approved for use in Connecticut. Historically, we've used the total resource cost test and the societal cost test, thinking about is this a net positive cash investment and is the state of Connecticut better off? In this program in particular, PURA took a slightly different tact because of that focus on cost effectiveness. They were really looking at RIM, the ratepayer impact measure. And that's asking, is this likely to reduce costs for electric ratepayers? And how do you set up a program to ensure that the benefits to all ratepayers exceed the costs as we're using ratepayer funds to fund the program? And the Green Bank brought in a focus on the PCT, or the participant cost test. So we wanted to make sure that this was going to be a good deal for customers that adopted the program. If you could move down to the next slide. So setting the incentives for this program was an optimization challenge. So pulling in the various benefit streams and balancing the desire for higher incentives to vulnerable communities. How do we get to that? This was really focused on the 100 megawatts that's going to be deployed in the first 3 years. PURA set a goal for us for the ratepayer impact measure of 1.4, and we had an internal goal of PCT of 1 that was adopted by PURA. So you can see that through our work with Guidehouse, we were able to sort of optimize those incentive levels to achieve both a net program RIM of 1.4 and PCT of 1. And I've included the other cost tests here just so that those of you, if you're more familiar with the other ones, can see what the program is creating on those ones too. Something that I want to call out here before passing it over to Ed is that BCAs are essentially good faith estimates, and it won't be until we launch the program that we're able to capture actual costs and benefits, and we're able to see if we were actually able to achieve the 1.4 and 1 PCT and RIM goals that we were going for. And so as directed by PURA, we've contracted with an EM&V vendor to do exactly that. And the plan is to tweak the program design in these 3-year cycles to ensure that we are able to achieve those benefits that I went through. So I'm going to pass it to Ed now to dive into the program design and how we're planning to operationalize this.
Thanks, Sarah. So we're on slide 16, program design. So our incentives will be divided into residential and commercial and industrial. So for residential, our customer classes are categorized by standard, underserved, and low-income households. The underserved households are those in a distressed municipality as designated by the DECD. Low-income households are those whose income is under 60% of area median income, or those in affordable housing per state definition. For commercial and industrial customers, the classes are categorized by small, medium, and large, which is based on the annual peak demand. Small C&Is for customers with less than 200 kilowatts of annual demand, medium is 200 to 500, and large is anything greater than 500 kilowatts of peak demand. So the systems participating in the Energy Storage Solutions program will receive 2 incentives. The first is the upfront incentive for what's called passive dispatch, also known as the set it and forget it. In this part of the program, the customer's batteries will be preset to meet on-site loads according to the schedule on the chart here. So this means that all non-holiday summer weekdays between June and August from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m. So the battery will be preset to discharge 80% of its energy during these windows. In exchange for participating in the passive dispatch for 10 years, the customer will receive an upfront incentive based on the energy capacity of the battery. And I have more detail on that in a later slide on the specifics of the upfront incentive. So next is the performance incentive for what's called active dispatch. In this part of the program, the customer's batteries can be fully discharged by the utility during a period of high grid demand. These high demand events will be predicted and customers will be notified, expected to be about a day ahead, giving customers the option to decline participation in that particular event if they choose, if they have an event where they need to have their storage fully charged. So the battery will be called upon to discharge fully over a 3-hour period between noon and 9 p.m. Any 3-hour window during that time is expected. Between June and September for the summer, which is the bulk of the incentive, or November to March for the winter, which will probably be about a handful of events per season. So next slide, please. So here's an example of how passive dispatch scheduling works. So you can see here that passive dispatch events are all pre-planned. This would be a week during the summer, assuming no holidays. So the passive dispatch is pre-planned during that time. And if you could go to the next slide, please. But when an active dispatch is called, this would be in an event where there were 3 active dispatches called in 1 week. It will override those passive events. So you can see that the passive events that were scheduled have kind of grayed out a little bit and the active will override. So customers won't be penalized for not participating in a passive event since the active dispatch event will override. Next slide, please, which I believe is 19 EDC collaboration. So this program is overseen by PURA, paid for by Connecticut ratepayers, and co-administered by the Green Bank, Eversource, and UI. As ordered by PURA, the responsibilities will be split between the 3 program administrators. The Green Bank will be responsible for marketing and outreach, upfront incentive administration, EM&V, and data aggregation and publication. We've been busy over the last few months working on these responsibilities, creating a marketing plan, building a customer enrollment platform, and working with our EM&V contractor. The EDCs will be responsible for the performance incentive and the system dispatch. The Green Bank will enroll the customers in our enrollment platform, which is in development now and expected to be launched with the program in January. And we will pass along the information to the utilities to enroll the customers' batteries for dispatch. Next slide, please. So for residential incentive levels, as described in the earlier slides, there are upfront and performance-based incentives, and these are the residential rates. So our upfront incentive levels will go in steps similar to our step based on the total approved capacity. The first step will be 10 megawatts, then 15, then 25 for steps 2 and 3. We expect the steps to be active through the first 3 years of the program's operation, approximately 1 step per year as we ramp up. The incentives for residential customers are set for standard rate and then 1.5 and a 2 multiplier for underserved and low income customers respectively. So the step 1 incentives for upfront incentives are $200, $300, and $400 for standard, underserved, and low income customers. And we expect that step 1 will accommodate up to about 1,400 residential customers, assuming 14 kilowatt hours or so per project, which is about the size of 1 Tesla Powerwall unit. You jump next to the commercial incentive levels. Next slide, it's 21. And so here are the commercial incentive levels. So as shown here, they're broken up by small, medium, and large. So incentives for small commercial and small business are going to be the same as residential standard rate at $200 per kilowatt hour of capacity in the battery. Medium commercial are slightly lower at $175, and then large is $100 per kilowatt hour. The performance incentives for both residential and commercial, no matter the class, no matter the subcategory of underserved or low income, the performance incentive levels will be the same for all participants in the program. So for years 1 through 5, the summer incentive will be $200 per kilowatt of battery output capacity made available during those 3-hour events. And at the end of each season, the participant will be paid based on the average number of kilowatts made available across all events. So if a participant declines an event, then they would get 0 kilowatts for that event. So it would average in with the total expected to be anywhere between 30 and 60 events per year between summer and winter. Summer will have many more events, probably closer to 50, 55, and winter will be expected to be about 1 to 3 events per year. The assumption for program participation in the commercial incentive levels is expected to be about 25% small, 30% medium, and 45% large commercial. So that's it for the incentives, and I'll turn it back to Brian for the next slide.
Great, Sergio and I, Ed and Sarah, happy to take questions.
Brian, this is Matt. I had maybe a question and a comment. One thing I was curious about was there was talk about grid edge customers being sort of a category of customers who would be eligible. And I just wonder if that might include, I think that was based on frequency of losing power. And so I wonder if some of those grid edge customers might be really a subset of people who lose power because they're in flood hazard areas, et cetera. Or, well, not et cetera, flood hazard areas. And so has the program looked at, or is this someone else's area to look at? What are are we putting our assets into sort of harm's way, if you will? And so do we have specs, if you're in a flood hazard area, does the asset have to be a certain amount over base flood elevation? Also, would it trigger, certain building code requirements that are triggered if you take state money in a flood hazard area that are intended to protect the state money? I don't want to question later of why we weren't getting the same types of protections. So I guess the general question, has anyone looked at that subset of grid edge people and seen if we're going to trigger regulatory requirements for them, or if we should trigger regulatory requirements for them? And if not, or maybe in addition, do we have our own specs for those types of grid edge customers?
Matt, that is an incredible question. And Sarah, I'm going to turn it to you because I think it's perfectly timely. I'll turn it to you to respond.
Yeah, Brian and I are laughing because we actually had a great chat yesterday with Circa, who are in the process of developing a resilience vulnerability index tool where you can sort of look across the state and identify which communities are vulnerable to which risks. And we, you know, for the grid outage definition that I went through in my presentation, that has been mandated by PURA, and it is really sort of a backwards looking grid edge definition. And we've certainly been kicking around, how do we think about this as the grid edge changes in the future, and how do we incorporate flood risk into it? And so we're working with Circuit to sort of layer that data into their tool and into our decision making. Yeah, it just came up yesterday in that discussion, and I certainly aspire to ensure that any storage systems that get installed in flood zones are not installed at ground level.
Okay, and maybe take a look at I think it's the 2017 amendments to the building code that were intended to address the issue for structures that receive state funding. And actually, Circa, I think, wrote a white paper on it back in 2015. I can send it to you.
Great.
The other question I have was just about I think it was the performance incentives have a sort of projected 10-year hitch. Is there any thought about would there be any sort of clawback or penalty if a project goes offline prior to that 10 years? I'm thinking of like the state 490 program, which is a 10-year hitch for, open space. And, the idea was we're not just buying the 1-year incentive, we're buying the length as well. So I don't know if that's looked at. I know we don't want to make it punitive. We want people to participate, and there's an aligned interest for them to stay online, but things happen. And I just didn't know if that's something that was looked at.
Another great question, Matt. Ed, can I turn to you to respond?
Sure. So on the upfront incentive, that's the one where the customer has to participate for the 10 years in the passive dispatch. We did put in a callback mechanism in the program manual where I believe it's at the end of each year during the EMV period, we would assess which customers were not meeting the requirements because we do have data requirements, so we can monitor each customer's participation. So in the event that a customer wasn't participating, or if they had reprogrammed their battery to not participate in passive dispatch, they would be notified, and there is a process to actually claw back the incentive if they just stop participating or if they wish to withdraw. On the performance incentive level, it is because it's performance incentive, they simply just wouldn't get paid the incentive if they didn't participate in the active dispatch. And Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that there was an additional clawback associated with not participating in active dispatch. Is that right?
That's correct. So the benefit that you get from active dispatch is based on your average response over the season. And so even though we hope that customers sort of participate in every event, if they don't, they're going to get a benefit that year that is less than they would have if they had participated in more events.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, I had a comment, which is that to the extent that these incentives are being offered to commercial entities, and I guess that part of our role is doing the advertising and solicitation on that stuff. It just has to be a really aggressive program, because as we've seen, it's really hard to get the business community to participate in something that they're not familiar with. So it needs to be repetitive, it needs to be simple, and it just needs to really do aggressive outreach if it's going to succeed?
Yeah, I would say, John, in general, like the benchmarks that we've looked at are other markets, other CNI markets, California. I'm blanking on who else was out there that we looked at, but we did look at them. And then the local benchmark, the ZREC, LREC market, and the maturity of that market, right? We've got a pretty mature small, medium, and large solar installation market behind the meter there. So we feel pretty good that they'll be able to transition and pull this up. So the market broadly will pull itself along. The Green Bank's role specifically is to ensure that we uphold PURA's policy objectives of maximizing the deployment of battery storage in areas of resilience that they're targeting, grid edge, critical facilities, the things Sarah was talking about, as well as ensuring that we're deploying them in distressed communities, affordable housing, low-income households. So our role really on the marketing side, and we included our marketing plan within the materials, is to really ensure that there's no gap being left behind, that we're lifting everybody up, and specifically those that are being targeted by the policy. But I would expect, Sergio, Mackie, if you wanted to weigh in here, that the CNI market's going to be very mature here. There might be some larger issues on supply chain that the industry is facing with regards to getting batteries, but I think the CNI market's going to be pretty aggressive.
So just another comment, and I appreciate that comment from John. And so first of all, this is just a really exciting program. We're thrilled about this. We're excited about the potential for this program to help offset some of our reliability concerns over time, and to also address resilience. So we do have a team within the Bureau of Energy and Technology Policy who is involved in the PURA docket. So I'm going to abstain because they might have things that are sort of in the weeds of the marketing approach and stuff that they would like to comment on in the PURA docket. But I did want to say, we're really excited to see this moving forward.
This is Dominic. I just had another quick question, and it's maybe too in the weeds too, but and thank you for including the marketing plan with the materials. And thinking about the sort of target market, I don't know if you could speak a little bit more about how you're going to sort of talk about the backup functionality, because I think at least on the residential side and probably also on the commercial side, that's a big selling point for installing these systems. And so like balancing that with having sort of a passive draw on these, and if you could just talk a little bit about how that's going to work in practice and how you guys are going to kind of like discuss that.
Another great question. Sarah, Ed, you want to take it?
Sure. So yes, it's definitely a marketing challenge to figure out how you discuss some of these topics. As we highlight in the marketing plan, storage is a less familiar technology to our potential customers than solar is, for example. And so there's an element of educating them about what storage is, how it provides you resilience, and at the same time, we're telling you that we're going to be using your battery on your behalf to create benefit for everybody. From the program design aspect, and I see Eric has come off mute and maybe can talk a little bit more to the marketing aspect after this, but from the program design elements, the EDCs have committed to any day that there is anytime that there is a declared storm event, which they have defined through a separate docket with PURA. It's a 5-point scale. So anytime any storm event is declared, customers will have complete control over their batteries for 2 days preceding the anticipated storm. Of course, the utilities are not able to anticipate every outage, but we hope that this will be sort of the majority of situations where there could be power outages. Customers will have had complete control over their systems for 2 days preceding that to fully charge it up and not have it discharged. Eric, do you want to talk about how we're messaging that?
Certainly. And Mike, I totally want to recognize your point. Figuring out how we communicate this to customers is, frankly, been one of the harder parts of thinking about marketing for this program. We are talking about resiliency, but we're trying to manage expectations. So we're giving in the marketing materials that we sent out, where we have some charts that talk about how much a battery could power. I think that we keep pushing or pointing back to contractors as ultimately the ones that are going to help right size batteries for a customer's home. And we are still finalizing what we call the cell sheets, which are the basis for the sales of batteries, the basis for the what we're pointing to as the benefits, and I'm happy to forward that along. We do highlight the resiliency, but we do point back to, look, you got to have somebody else who's going to help you get this right-sized and can help you better figure out what will be powered in your home. I hope that helped, and I hope that wasn't.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for explaining that.
Do we have any more questions? I have that we haven't voted on resolution 4 yet. Is that the one? Is that the one we're going to be voting on?
We're going to be voting on resolution 5. Resolution 4.
Okay, I see that. So what happened to resolution 4?
That was in the consent agenda. That was the fuel cell energy project extension.
Okay, I just wanted to double check because it's a wild ride. So do I hear a motion to approve resolution number 5?
So moved.
Second, this is Matt.
Thank you, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstaining. Vicky, you're abstaining?
Yes, I'm abstaining. Thank you.
Okay.
And Brenda's also abstaining.
And Brenda is also abstaining. All righty. Moving on. Financing programs, updates and recommendations. Mackie Dykes.
Yes, thank you, Chair Reed. Good morning, everyone. This is Mackie Dykes, the Vice President of Financing Programs, here today to talk about our Small Business Energy Advantage Financing Partnership with Eversource. Next slide, please. Just quick overview, we will be requesting a short-term extension to this partnership. But before I get into that, let me just give a reminder of what this partnership looks like. So SBEA is a program that's run by both Eversource and UI, but it's only Eversource that we work with on this financing partnership. As the name implies, it's available to small businesses, but as the name doesn't make clear, it's also available to state and certain municipal facilities. It provides upfront energy audits, incentives, and then on-bill financing. It's 0% 4-year financing up to $100,000 for businesses and up to $1 million for state and municipal customers. Previously, Eversource had been using primarily shareholder capital to fund these loans, and then the efficiency programs, the conservation and load management funds were buying down that rate to 0% so that the customer could receive that 0% financing. That capital cost was around or between 9 and 10%. So it was quite expensive for the efficiency funds to provide that buy down. So this was an opportunity for us. The CEF, the efficiency fund, had been asking for years actually for us to work on this problem. It took a while. We worked on it for years, as board members who were around at that time will remember. But after an RFP process that we ran with Eversource, we ended up selecting Amalgamated Bank to provide this the structure where us providing 10% of the capital and Amalgamated Bank providing the remaining 90%. We purchase the SBEA loans from Eversource, and those loans are actually backstopped by the efficiency fund. So, we see this as it's a great opportunity. We're able to provide the program with lower cost capital, which reduces the cost to run the program, which makes more funding available for incentives. We're able to increase the access to capital. It was limited before when they were using shareholder capital. And I mean, as I mentioned, given that backstop, these are great investments. We're very protected. And so both us and Amalgamated love this partnership. The rate is it's 30-day LIBOR plus 2.25%. That's the current rate. It has been for the last 3 years. So this partnership is actually coming to an end. What is today? The 17th, on the 21st. If you can go to the next slide, please. So in 4 days. I'm sorry. Here's just a sort of an overview, a graphic of the partnership. As I mentioned, we purchased the loans from Eversource. Amalgamated Bank takes 90%. We take 10%. And then Eversource acts as the servicer. These loans are repaid on the electric bill. So Eversource collects the funds and remits them to us at Amalgamated, and then provides that backstop through the CEF. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, let me mention one key number there at the top. Just speaking of the success of this program, we've provided over $72 million in funding and over 5,700 loans. So this has been a great partnership, which all parties are very happy with. Which now gets me to my main point. As I mentioned, this next slide. This is expiring in 4 days. All parties are interested in a long-term extension to the program, another 3 years. And the Green Bank has been pushing for changes to increase access to capital, as well as increase our position and our revenue. So to that latter goal, we want to increase our share of the loans from 10% to 20%. We want to, in terms of the loans that are offered that we'll buy, we want to increase the maximum term from 4 to 7 years. That'll allow for longer payback measures and more comprehensive projects. Right now, we're at around 90% lighting projects. So we want to start to, again, just with longer terms, we can make more comprehensive projects with longer paybacks. We can make them cash flow positive, so more attractive to borrowers. And we want to continue to stretch the loan limits for different borrowers, so increase the access to capital. The muni side, we want to uncap the aggregate loan balance. So munis currently can, across all their properties, borrow $1 million. We want to remove that cap. And then on the business side, we want to increase the aggregate customer loan limit to $1 million. We'd still keep that $100,000 limit in place per building, but we've got a lot of sort of portfolio owners, banks, gas stations, where they got restaurants. We have multiple buildings across the state where we can, come in and do several of those up to $1 million. So those are just some of the key terms that we're working on. But we don't expect to have that done in the next 4 days. So we're requesting today a short-term extension of the existing partnership. I apologize. We in the memo had said there would be no change of the existing terms. However, in the last week, as we've continued to discuss that with Amalgamated Bank, we realized there's one tweak we think that might be necessary. As I mentioned earlier, the interest rate is tied to LIBOR. It's been advised that all banks stop using that as a benchmark on December 31st. I think folks are probably aware of all the issues with LIBOR in the past, and that the whole market is moving away from using that as a benchmark. So we'd like even in the 6-month extension, we'd like the flexibility to change the benchmark rate to something that would result in a similar rate for the next 6 months. But again, we have that flexibility to pick a different benchmark. And then once we've finished finalizing the long-term extension terms, including the benchmark and all these other things that I talked about, we'll come back to you for a full approval. So again, the request today is just a 6-month extension with giving staff the ability to change the benchmark pricing that would result in a similar rate to what we see with the current benchmark. And I'll pause there for questions. Or Bert, if you want to add anything in terms of the request, the sort of new request about the change in benchmark.
We can't hear you, Bert, if you're responding, just so you know. Actually, it looks like he's not on. But any questions?
So do I hear a motion to approve resolution 6?
So this is Matt. I'll move for approval of resolution 6.
Thank you, Matt. We're here a second.
This is Brenda. I'll second that motion.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, it's Bert here. I'm dialed in, but for some reason my phone is not working. So I was trying to make a comment on the LIBOR just to make it clear to the board, and you've already passed the resolution. So thank you very much for that flexibility. The LIBOR the 1-month LIBOR benchmark will continue to be posted after 12/31. But after the first week of March, it's been indicated to us that it will cease to be representative in an official sense. So that is why we appreciate you giving us the flexibility to select.
Great. It feels like you went away again, Bert.
Yeah, we lost you, Bert.
Okay. Well,
did you plug your car into your phone? Is that what's going on here?
I'm now over here with Jane, so I'm not sure. Maybe I've got the bugaboos here with the system following me.
God.
Can you hear me?
Yes. I can hear you. And
all
actually, right. You're up next, right? We're going to talk about investment updates.
Yeah. So anyway, I was just saying that the LIBOR will continue to be posted after December 31, but it ceases to be representative after the first week of March. So that's why the necessary flexibility. So appreciate the board giving us that. Okay.
And so we're going to talk about investment updates beyond this, or are we done with that?
Yeah, we're actually going to go to Skyview Ventures right now, and we have Louise Della Pesca on the line, I believe. And if you're there, Louise, I'll just hand it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bert. Thank you all. Forgive me for not coming on camera. I'm in an unconventional work setting due to my husband isolating for COVID. So I'm talking today about, and I'm on slide 29 for anyone following along. I'm talking today about a request to amend a debt facility with a special purpose vehicle owned by an entity called Skyview Ventures. Just want to say up front that we did bring this exact request to the deployment committee on November 17th, and the deployment committee passed the resolution to recommend approval of this request by the board of directors. To start with some background then, the transaction that I'm discussing is a senior secured term loan facility with an SPV of Skyview. It's 100% owned by Skyview Ventures, which has business interests that include commercial solar development and has been in business since 2008. So the borrower of the current term loan facility that we have in place develops commercial solar power purchase agreement projects, so PPA projects in Connecticut. But it's now branching out to do energy storage solutions projects, which we've heard so much about on this agenda already, and heard the excitement about the new incentive program in the state. Of the existing facility, which has a commitment of $7 million, we already deployed almost $5 million, which has gone to the financing of 35 commercial solar PPA projects. So why are we asking to amend this facility documentation? Well, first thing to say is that, as we've heard so much already, the Green Bank really supports the deployment of energy storage solutions projects in Connecticut, and Skyview has developed a pipeline of around 30 of those projects. So that's an exciting opportunity to finance these projects. And further, the facility already finances commercial solar PPA projects, and Skyview has an ongoing pipeline which we would like to finance, and therefore we would like to increase the commitment size overall for the facility. Next slide, 30, please. This transaction diagram just focuses purely on the solar PPA projects that we have been financing with the borrower. It shows the parent company, Skyview Ventures, of the SPV, the borrower. It shows Cephia Holdings as lender, and then at the bottom of the slide there, it shows that the borrower owns various projects. It's the sole owner. There's no other debt and no other equity partners in this structure, and each project has its own off-taker for the PPA, the power purchase agreement. Those off-takers are primarily municipalities in Connecticut. Next slide, 31, please. So I want to really emphasize before going into this slide then that our focus on expanding the debt facility is to help the deployment of capital to support energy storage solutions projects which contribute to Pura's objectives that were talked about earlier in the meeting. So building energy storage solutions projects at the grid edge for critical facilities and in distressed municipalities or underserved communities. This slide is actually focusing purely on the solar PPA pipeline that we would like to finance with Skyview, and it shows that of the contracted pipeline of solar PPA projects, one's at a critical facility and 4 are located in underserved communities. So that that shows that Skyview is developing solar projects in areas that we're interested in supporting, and we hope that we will be able to work with Skyview on applying the same approach for its energy storage solutions projects. Next slide, 32, please. So I'm going to talk then briefly about the controls that we would put in place to ensure stewardship of this money, and also changes to the facility itself. So the controls specifically focus on the energy storage solutions projects, part of the financing facility. And we would only finance energy storage solutions projects that are participating in the energy storage solutions program that we've heard about today. And the reason for that is because there are embedded rules and regulations to be part of that program and qualify for incentives, which are appealing to us as a lender, because the installer has to use commercially available technology, the equipment has to have 10-year warranties, which equals the length of the project life themselves. And the projects would have to be reviewed and approved by utilities. So these are all good credit positive things for us as a lender. The changes that we're requesting approval to make to the facility are to increase the total commitment from the $7 million level that it's at now up to $10 million. And secondly, make the required changes to the documentation so that we're allowed to finance energy storage solutions projects with construction and term debt. Next slide, please, 33. So when we first set up the facility back in 2020, we did an analysis of risks and how we could mitigate those risks. So these risks here are focusing on the solar aspect of the financing, and that's because that was what was in place when we first set up the facility. So the operational risk is that the revenue that solar projects generate and ultimately the debt service coverage ratio depend on production of the solar technology, so the performance of the technology. But the way we've mitigated that risk is that firstly, we originally were only financing projects that had been operational for a period of time, and so we could see that they were good performers, between 95 and 105%. And then for new builds, we were performing the exact same diligence that Greenbank would perform if it was developing solar projects for itself or for another partner. And we've been doing that for 6 or 7 years now, so we're fairly experienced. We also stress tested cash flows to ensure that even if solar facilities were not performing to expectation, there would still be a healthy debt service coverage ratio of 1.15 times. And we noted that solar performance would have to be, almost 20% below expectation to hit a debt service coverage ratio of 1. Next slide, 34, please. Another risk that we considered when setting up the facility was default risk, i.e. failing to make its debt repayments. This is mitigated by the debt sizing. We're not oversizing advances of debt here. Debt service coverage ratio has to be 1.3 or more, which provides a healthy buffer. Also, regarding debt sizing, we're ensuring that not too much debt is advanced. The advance rate is generally 70% of cash flows, future cash flows from the project. We did consider the downside scenario that the borrower does fail to make repayments, and we have to call in our collateral, which is solar power purchase agreement projects, and that certainly is within the operational comfort zone of the Greenbank. We already have 20 megawatts of commercial solar under management, and we would be well set up to bring those into in-house if that was required. Next slide, please. 35. Oh, and that's the end. And now this is the resolution, but of course, stop for questions first.
Madam Chair, this is Matt. I just want to say I'm going to abstain from this matter.
And Benu, this is Lonnie. Benu,
Yes.
Did you have any other questions? I think you had questions during the deployment, you and Matt both.
I don't recall the specific question. I'm sorry, Lonnie.
Oh, no. I just want to make sure everybody is has an opportunity to speak if they feel so moved.
I can move it.
You will move it? Oh, good. Excellent. I like that. That's good. Okay, may I hear a second?
Second, John Harity.
Thank you, John. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And abstentions. Matt is abstaining.
Correct.
Okay. Excellent. Let's see. I think, Brian, are you going to talk about?
Yes, environmental infrastructure. We're on page 7.
Yeah. Okay, that's like I'm just.
Perfect. All right.
It's like a PhD thesis getting through these agendas. Yes. So, because I know there's some exciting work going on, and we have Dominic on board now, which is very cool. So, go ahead.
Awesome. So yeah, so we wanted to provide a peek into the process in terms of kind of how things are going. I would say, actually, before I get to like a typical Brian Garcia crazy slide, I wanted to say, like, we're having a lot of fun. Ashley Stewart and myself. Ashley is a consultant that I've brought on board to help me have conversations with stakeholders and collect the data, make sense of the data, try to write up the data. So some of the things we're going to be sharing here today are reflections on the meetings that Ashley and I have had over the last 2 months. I'll jump into the sectors in a second. But what I would like to do is, after this meeting today, is share with you all a brown bag lunch presentation and conversation that Ashley and I had with the Green Bank staff earlier this week. So for those of you who are interested in kind of listening in about more details on what's happening in the field, you can kind of jump in there. But so at a high level, and we've got Monica Reed from Kestrel, who's going to be later on the agenda, talking about the social impact that the Green Bank, has supported, the process under which she looks at and takes a look at how we assess that impact. But what you're looking at here is a slide that depicts the 10-year social and environmental impact that we've helped create from enabling $2.1 billion of investment in the deployment of clean energy in the state. We just talked about battery storage, and Matt had that really great poignant question around how battery storage connects to not only ensuring power for the end user, but also what happens in the context of batteries being sited in vulnerable areas in the event of a flood. Well, our new statutory definition of environmental infrastructure includes climate adaptation and resilience projects. So actually, our battery storage program is the foundation to how we're thinking about resilience. In the context of energy, it is how do we help end-use consumers respond to grid outages by having batteries installed. Both of these things, mitigating, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and adapting to the impacts of climate change, are ways to confront it. We are all dealing with the impacts of having too much greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. And as a result, we're experiencing rain bombs, polar vortexes, heat domes. We're experiencing it. It's daily. So just high level, wanted to provide you with that view that front and center for us is ensuring that we're confronting climate change. Now, you might recall within the definition that there are a number of different segments that we are looking at in terms of environmental infrastructure. Ashley and I have broken those segments up because there is a lot of activity in each segment. We're literally having conversations with, in the first case, nearly 20 groups to understand land conservation and parks and recreation in the state of Connecticut, and just trying to organize our thoughts, come up the learning curve, what are the policies, what's the market. So we're really focused in here, and I'm going to share with you some insights. But you should know that crossing all of these sectors and the conversations that we're engaging in, front and center is how these sectors and investment in these sectors will help us adapt to the impacts of climate change, make ourselves more resilient. And what we'll share today is that it can actually also help us reduce greenhouse gas emissions too. So that's one, confronting climate change, our mission. Secondly is we have conversations too with regards to equity and ensuring that we are driving and enabling investment and benefits that will inure to vulnerable communities. That is a statutory definition. That's a goal now in our comprehensive plan. So we're trying to understand how groups and stakeholders are thinking about that as a cross-cutting issue. So let me share a little bit. So nature-based solutions, when you think about this, obviously I think we all have different concepts of what this means. Just being on a hiking trail, like, yes, that's part of it. That you might be on a privately owned land trust that is allowing you to hike a trail to enjoy nature in Connecticut. So there are ways to look at how land can both reduce greenhouse gas emissions, in large part sequester or store carbon, as well as improve our ability to become more resilient to the impacts of climate change. For example, flooding, protecting open space that allows us to have buffers that prevent us from major floods. So protecting land, not wanting to see more land lost to development, improving the management of lands. I'll talk about that in a second. And then restoring existing land cover, to provide ecosystem services the way we think about what land provides to us. Water, clean water, how can we clean it up to help us utilize it? So nature-based solutions has the ability to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, carbon storage, and increase our resilience against climate change flooding. I'm excited to say, and maybe in our other businesses section, Deputy Commissioner Hackett could speak about Executive Order 21-3. Within that order are 3 specific nature-based solutions approaches that acknowledge both mitigation and adaptation impacts around Connecticut's forests and our agriculture system, and how we would look at nature-based solutions in the context of state properties, state parks, state forests. The state owns quite a bit of property. So this is all to say that nature can be a partner to us to help us confront climate change. We are all very familiar with this image here. For those of you board members who were involved in the SHREC securitization, Sergio was talking about this earlier. Forest carbon markets are really similar to that. So in the context of SHRECs, the Green Bank, provide incentives to 45,000 plus residential homeowners who install solar on their rooftops. In exchange for those incentives, we receive the renewable energy credits that are produced from those systems. We sell those renewable energy credits to the utilities, who are required to comply to the renewable portfolio standard. So we have a long-term contract with the utilities, and we get to state the price on those renewable energy credits. So that expected revenue that would come from the production of kilowatt hours, we could then issue a bond. So we issued Green Liberty bonds to raise the capital that supports the upfront incentives in our ongoing administration, ultimately helping the state achieve its 350 megawatt target that Sergio was talking about. So we completely get that. Forest carbon markets are completely analogous to that. So imagine in this context, carbon offsets, or in some cases, ecosystem services. Imagine reducing nitrogen discharge in the watershed through some sort of performance-based contract. There are people who do that improves water quality. In the case of carbon offsets, there are conservation organizations who are willing to provide training and capital upfront to support small landowners to better manage forests. So if you are a small privately held land owner, and Connecticut has a lot of them, I think some 35 to 40% of land in Connecticut is owned by private landowners. It's large, and they're very small landowners. So, states like California have compliance programs where they're required to meet GHG emission reductions. They can actually comply to their cap and trade program by supporting forest carbon offsets in states like Virginia, for example. There are companies like Amazon that voluntarily commit to reducing their own greenhouse gas emissions by committing to purchasing long-term contracts for carbon offsets that come from forests. So there are markets out there. We're engaged in them not only in our SHREC program, but also in our EV recharger offset program that some board members might recall. You could imagine that if you have those contracts in place with a good methodology for estimating carbon offset production, that you could issue a bond against that expected future production of carbon offsets to a price for a carbon offset that a buyer is willing to pay. So again, we're all familiar with this. We could issue bonds. Maybe there's a way Reggie can back it, SCARF can back it. Obviously, the revenues coming from the offsets, potentially from the ecosystem services, would provide the capital for the revenue bond. And if you do that, maybe we preserve or conserve more land in Connecticut that would contribute to us achieving the open space goal. Connecticut has a 21% by 2023 open space goal. By doing this, we reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase our resilience, as I was talking about before, but it might also improve recreational opportunities, better ecosystem services, and most importantly is helping support local landowners build the green economy. So we're familiar with this. In fact, the Nature Conservancy and the American Forest Foundation have a program where they are trying to identify local small farmers to try to bring them into the carbon markets through an aggregation strategy. So again, really no different than what we've been doing with residential solar PV, but in this case, it's small landowners. So just wanted to share with you all some of the initial findings and conversations. There are several conservation finance organizations out there. The Nature Conservancy has NatureVest. There is the New England Forest Foundation. There is Ecosystem Investment Partners. These groups speak the language of green banks. They are all about financing projects at scale and trying to conserve land at a much larger scale than what tools have done prior. So Ashley and I are having a fun time with these conversations. So why don't I stop there and see if there are any questions, comments, but I will make, again, the presentation to the staff available so you all can listen to that for those interested, where we go into more detail on some of our findings.
Brian, this is John. Will there be money available to assist local land trust in purchasing land to take out of any kind of development stream?
I think that's to be determined, John, in terms of what we're trying to do. So broadly, I think there's an opportunity to support local landowners do exactly that. In terms of what's the role of the Green Bank in making that happen is still up for further exploration, discussion. One of the things we've talked about with the Yale School of the Environment, which is very expert in this space. Dominic and I studied underneath Brad Gentry, is having a conversation with local groups around what is missing, what can the Green Bank do to accelerate investment in doing just that. That is one tool, but there are many. And our goal is to identify what resources we have to enable these markets. We're going to have some priority decisions in the May timeframe when we will have recommendations at that timeframe. But right now, in land conservation, yes, we could do that, but we've got water, agriculture, waste, and other things ahead of us.
Thank you.
This is Lonnie, just building on what John just said. We have so many areas along the shoreline. There are so many pieces of property that are on the edge, and to really inventory those and to know, who's about to sell their farm to a developer, or, who's sniffing around trying to figure out, and also with the need for more affordable housing, sometimes those two goals collide. And to kind of get a better sense of, what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how much we need, and how to prioritize it, because there's just a lot going on now with absorbing. We have a farm now that the land trust is collecting money to be able to buy a big piece of a farm right along the shoreline that has been in the same family for several generations, so a lot of stuff like that. So I agree with John. I think it's good. The more we inventory it, the more we're in touch with the local land trust folks, and the more we have a game plan, I think the better off we are.
That's right. Yeah, and there are a number of great, the Connecticut Land Conservation Council comes to mind. Again, these are all new groups for us, right? We're us in the energy space. We're fluent with all the nonprofits and organizations involved in the energy space, but in this context, these are all new players, and we're speaking to a number of them. On the equity side, it's interesting. Ashley and I have fun having those conversations too. There are, parks in some of our largest cities that are, or not parks, they're former brownfields that could potentially be parks. I'm blanking on the park currently at the moment, but there is one in Bridgeport, a large piece of property.
Oh yeah, the one that DuPont owns.
There we go. That's right.
Yeah, it was Remington Arms. And actually Deep has been cleaning it up. So it's in an incredible urban area. It would be such a positive asset for, kind of undoing some of the damage we've done over the years to all kinds of communities.
That's right. Remington Woods. That's it. And
yeah.
As Ashley and I go through this exploration too, you all have heard me talk about the history of clean energy innovation in Connecticut, and we have the Albert Pope Room, the Dr. Bernard Baker Room. We're finding the same thing with land conservation. Gifford Pinchot was born in Simsbury, Connecticut. He was the first director of the U.S. Forest Service underneath Teddy Roosevelt. He founded the Yale School of Forestry. We have Frederick Olmsted, who was born in Hartford, Connecticut, who's well known for Central Park. So Connecticut again has its history and its historical roots in leadership. Can we go back and bring some of that back? Well, like why not? This is the 200-year next year celebration of Olmsted. Why not look at those urban parks or those urban land spaces as possibilities for parks? Again, we're having a lot of fun learning and seeing how the Green Bank might enable more investment in environmental infrastructure.
Brian, just one more comment. I'm on the Heartland Land Trust. We're an extremely rural community that is probably one of the best bets for actually seeing how Connecticut was 100 years ago or before that. And when we buy land, it's almost always through some sort of grant through the Audubon Society or somebody else. I mean, there's just not enough money up here to from private donations to put together the money to buy a land, for set aside. So that's one of the things with the land trusts is that they really rely on grants in order to buy land.
That's right. And there are several programs that the state has to provide grants for that. But as you know, it's not enough, right? So the question becomes, what role the Green Bank can play to help enable more of that to happen? We've got some brewing.
Thanks.
So Brian, I dropped just a summary of the executive order into the chat, the governor's executive order 21.3 that was issued yesterday. And there is some overlap with this discussion and just sort of on a broader basis with the Green Bank's role, including appointment of the Green Bank to the new Clean Economy Council, which will advise the governor on strategies and policies to strengthen our climate mitigation, clean energy, resilience, and sustainability programs by leveraging state and federal funding, which we know we're going to have lots of federal funding. So it's really exciting. I'm sure, this will be something that we can discuss at a future board meeting, but just for overlap with what you're discussing now, we also have a provision about climate resilient economic development, which directs DECD to include resilience and adaptations as it considers municipal brownfield grants, and some other provisions. And there are also some natural and working lands provisions regarding, as you noted earlier, forest climate resilience, a mission for the Department of Agriculture to engage stakeholders, to explore working lands and soils, making them resilient to the impacts of climate change, and also for us at DEEP and DAS to look at nature-based solutions on state properties. So there's a lot in there. I provided the summary. I can also link the executive order itself.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Brian, this is Matt. Just one comment from me. I mean, it's very exciting. I actually do a lot of work on both sides of these. Like I do a lot of conservation and development work and land use work, and there are a lot of great groups out there, a lot of attention to it. But just, I'm not suggesting we have done this, but just my only urging would be not to lose sight of the flip side of the coin, which are healthy urban environments, which really enable and take development pressure off of these sites. I mean, the bottom line, in my opinion, after a career of land use work in Connecticut, is we are chronically underproduced housing, and that's not going to change. And that puts development pressure on these same assets that you're looking to find money to save. And to the extent we can make our cities more successful and grow their population, make them, sort of places people want to live more than they already do, that's good. Like we say about renewable energy. The corollary would be the cheapest carbon unit is the one we don't produce. So having people live densely in successful cities, and putting the underutilized old, industrial and commercial spaces back to use, whether they're brownfields or not, is going to do as much good as trying to steer, philanthropy funds into greenfields. There's only a limited number of those funds, but like we've done with renewable energy, if we can instead invite private money into areas where we want it, like urban centers. I mean, there's a lot of private money now looking to get into cities. That should be part of our strategy here, and really one I think should elevate and sort of talk about, because there's lots of people willing to talk about saving beautiful vistas and beautiful sites, and that's all important. But I think one thing we can bring to it is a well-rounded approach and elevate the profile of these other important decisions about urban centers and reducing sprawl, reducing vehicle miles traveled, all the benefits that could come with that. And in that vein, I also think we really need to look at the state as a whole, but really the Green Bank, as we develop our policies, is not having one size fits all adaptation resiliency strategies. What might make sense along a vast parts of Connecticut that are rural or suburban may constrain what otherwise has really good green benefits in an urban area. So we just, I think, need to recognize that different different parts of the fabric, if you will, the sort of land use fabric of the state, have the ability to contribute in different ways. In other words, as Lonnie said, affordable housing is an issue, and it's true. Sometimes they'll compete for spaces, but it's not a binary choice, one or the other. You can, if with some planning, you can find a way to solve both those problems, and different properties can contribute in different ways. So we just have to recognize that different parts of our state can offer different ways to address this infrastructure problem and carbon problem.
Matt, so good. I'm going to come to you. This was great. Thank you for all that.
And this is Dominic, and I'm looking forward to diving into all this with everyone as this starts to unfold. One just quick comment too is just building off of what Matt was saying, and everyone is, Brian, I think your example of the forest carbon was great. Also to think about all of these things and all these conversations in the context of what the Green Bank has done successfully in the past, which is to really leverage capital and think about the opportunities and the structures that would allow the Green Bank to provide that flexibility and to really be a catalyst in all these different contexts. And so thinking about how things map on the existing successes in the energy space, I think is always a good lens for all these conversations.
Excellent. Thank you, Dominic. Map across, yep. So that was it. Just wanted to do just kind of a quick catch up, and this is great feedback. So a few of you I'm going to follow up with as Ashley and I begin to venture into agriculture now too.
Excellent. It's exciting. So I think we're about to wrap up, but we wanted to let everybody hear from Monica Reed, who is, I had never heard this term before, a non-financial statistics auditor. And, one of the things that we've always have is, we have our accomplishments are based on, the numbers, and then we sort of wonder, well, how are we getting there? How are we making decisions? And what are we really accomplishing in terms of the goals we've set out for ourselves? So Monica Reed is going to tell us a little bit about, some of the things that we have been doing, how we've been measuring social, environmental impacts in the policies that we are pursuing. Monica.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's really nice to be here. I'm Monica Reed. I'm the CEO and founder of Kestrel Verifiers. And I want to tell you, we have a special affinity for Connecticut Green Bank. Connecticut Green Bank was our very first customer when we launched our new service to do second-party opinions, and we became approved verifiers for the climate bond standard. And so the very first investments that we certified or verified were your first issuance of SHREC loans. So thank you so much for the early support. Since then, we've gone on to be the market leaders in U.S. public finance. We currently have 67% of the market share for providing green and social and sustainability bond and climate bond external reviews. And so a lot of that, I think, is a benefit of your leadership coming in early and showing others how it could be done. And we just sort of took that model and we've really run with it. So, so thank you for your early support. So our company, Kestrel Verifiers, we do several things for your organization. So we started out, we did a climate bond certification on your original issuance of SHREC loans, and then a subsequent issuance of SHREC bonds. And then we did a second party opinion on your whole indenture and helped to parse out what kinds of activities the Green Bank would do that would be eligible for a climate bond designation, what kinds of activities are more suited for a green bond designation. And I don't think you had much that wasn't in either one of those two categories. And so we collaborated with the folks at the Green Bank to sort of come up with that whole methodology and provided a very robust second party opinion for that. And that kind of lays out your whole program. And then most recently we did a climate bond certification on your green Liberty bonds. I think that's right. We did a second party opinion on your green Liberty bonds. So it's just been an iterative process. But the other thing that we do for you is once a year, we actually take a look at your comprehensive, your annual comprehensive financial report. And we sort of go through it with a fine-tooth comb. And we, first of all, we check all the figures in it and the calculations. We check it for alignment with the things that you said you were going to report in those previous bonds and investments that we verified. We make suggestions and often add color around other incidental metrics like United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or even sometimes larger statewide goals, and just kind of provide a really good deep review on your financial report. And it's not so much the finances, but it's more the impact is where we focus. And it's been a really good learning exercise, I think, for both parties. We of course take everything we learn from working with the Green Bank and we go export it to other states and other clients, and that's great. And I think the Green Bank has learned from us in terms of where to place emphasis in impact reporting. And you're currently leaders in the U.S. in how you talk about your impacts, even things like translating your renewable energy into public health savings. I mean, that's a very forward-thinking way to do it. So I don't know, Eric or Brian, if there's anything else you'd like me to elaborate on, but I just wanted to say, like, that's what we do for you, and we're happy to do it, and we're really proud to be working with the Green Bank.
Yeah, I just want to thank Monica for all the work that she does and for all of her reviews, that the ultimate documents from the ACFR to all the reporting that we do around our green bonds are better for all the consulting that we get and suggestions that we get from Monica and her team.
Thank you. We have a great team. Our analysts are environmental scientists and social scientists, and so we sort of bring this more kind of critical lens to the impact. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Monica, and also thank you for teeing up. We really need an update on our Liberty bonds. Talk about something that's had national impact. Somebody, a financial person I know well in Texas, was saying, we're buying them. So they're selling everything. Texas is buying our stuff. Oh my God. Maybe they'll learn from us.
Heresy.
But I wanted to have Bert come back and David Beach come back to give us an update on where we are with our Green Liberty bonds.
Yes, can you hear me, Madam Chair?
I can.
Great, wonderful. So before we get to the Green Liberty notes, I wanted to advise the board. Hold on one second, I'm getting feedback over here. I wanted to advise the board that the historic Cargill Falls Mill project closed this week. For the new board members, this is a mill redevelopment project with 80 units of housing in the town of Putnam. on the banks of the Quinnebog River in Putnam. 34 of those units are affordable, and combined with the restoration of a hydroelectric facility there, which is going to put out about 1 megawatt of power once it's operational. So in July, the board approved an extra $1 million for CPACE funding related to energy efficiency upgrades. We combined that with $1.8 million made available by the Department of Housing, for which we're very appreciative. And that allowed a housing tax credit investor to contribute about $3.2 million for the project. So all of this enabled the project to pay out the bridge lender as well as the contractor, Haynes Construction. And so we're now in the final steps to finish the hydroelectric side of the project, and then get that up and running, and that'll be all done. So thank you again to the board for supporting us in that effort, and doing that restructuring and bringing that to closure. The Green Liberty Note.
Bert,
Sorry.
just before you leave the mill,
yeah.
I hope that we end up with some sort of signage there on a permanent basis that indicates the Green Bank's involvement.
Yes, we worked that into the documentation, John, and so hopefully we'll have that signage when we do a ribbon cutting in the spring.
Very cool. Great.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on the mill before we move on? Okay.
There's one in the chat, Bert. Looks like there's a question in the chat.
Oh, let's see. Love
Sorry,
a project. Any involvement with preservation?
No, I worked on the board of Preservation Connecticut for years, and we promoted mill redevelopment. I just wondered if it had any role in this particular project.
Not to my recollection. I don't believe they were involved. We've been working on this project since, gosh, I want to say 2013, 2014. It's been quite a ride here.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that they were involved.
Okay, just a question, just interested.
Just one quick comment. Congratulations, Bert and the whole team. It has been, long slog, and John's right. A sign would be an understatement of what you guys deserve at the site.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate that. Okay, on to the Green Liberty Notes. And thanks to Monica. Yes, Kestrel also verified these notes, which is the latest iteration on our Green Liberty Bonds program. And David is going to walk us through this. Before he starts, I want to say that YouTube picks these still photos. I had nothing to do with that. Although I'm sure my mother would love it. but anyway, so David, you can take it away and talk to the board about the Green Liberty Notes program. Thank you.
Thanks, Bert. Well, I think we can all agree you look great in that still image there. Yeah, we're very excited that the Green Liberty Notes are officially live. They went live Tuesday afternoon, and we went live with our marketing push Wednesday morning. This is a real team effort. We pulled in people from all parts of the Green Bank. We learned a lot. This is our first crowdfunded issuance, so there was a lot to learn and a lot more to continue learning, but we're very excited to finally be live. The notes are actually backed by the SBA capitalization, which Mackie discussed earlier on this call. So that's really exciting and gives investors a chance to take part in that great financing effort from the Green Bank. And with these notes, we're really trying to target investors who don't have $1,000 to spend on a Green Liberty bond or don't have a broker. And also just, anyone looking for some of those investment options with a shorter maturity, but still has a green bond designation. So we put some protections in place to ensure we're protecting those investors there's a maximum investment per offeree of $10,000. And we're prioritizing first Connecticut residents who invest $1,000 or less, and then we're protecting, and then the second priority will go to all other investors who invest $1,000 or less, and then we'll open it up to all other investors, first come, first served at that point. And so far, we currently have 14 investors. 9 of those are from Connecticut, and 9 of the investors have invested $1,000 or less, and 4 of those are Connecticut investors. So some good demand so far, but if you haven't yet, please share the Green Banks post on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter. Let your friends and family know this is a great stocking stuffer, because we really want as many people as possible to be able to invest in these. So that's all I have for the update, but obviously we'll be here for questions.
Thanks, David. Madam Chair, I'll give it back to you and to field any questions.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Bert, while you're still here, I don't know if Louise is still on, but she said her husband has COVID. And I think we want to.
No, I clarified that. She's not, I don't think she's still on, but he was traveling, so he needed to quarantine. So.
Oh, I see. Okay. So it was like, I thought, oh my God. And we sort of let that go by. So wishing them all well. And
I'll pass that along. Thank you.
Please. And wishing everybody well. And I think unless anybody is really objecting to it, I'll hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, second?
I'll second.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Happy holidays.